wearable mic? Is it possible? Yeah. Okay. I usually can't stand still when I'm presenting, so I was looking for a mic that I could walk and talk. Not sure if that's possible. But
if you prefer to sit.
No, that's no problem. I usually like to move around. Okay, thank you. Well, first I'd like to say it's an honor and a privilege to be here amongst all of you in this thought leadership. And thank you very much to Sev for the invitation and for the opportunity to share some of our experiences and stories. Perfect, okay. So this is working fine. Okay, great. So I'll have two things here. So I wanted to just kind of kick off, and you heard a lot about what Industry 4.0 is, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time going back through that, but I thought I'd give you a point of view from ABB, but also from the experience we have with our customers and manufacturing partners worldwide. And so just briefly, we'll get into that, but more importantly, I wanted to share some results of some of the early pilots that have turned into actual projects that our customers are employing, and talk a bit about the ROI, and talk a bit about the return that they're seeing with these projects. So let's get started. So we think of what's happened with the Industrial Revolutions, especially around the opportunity that we have ahead of us with the fourth, is really it's about brawn and brain. You know, when you think about all of the early advances, they were about moving things faster, automating things, putting in programmable logic, PLCs, and various other types of tools. And really now, we're beyond that. We had interoperability with things like the OPC Foundation and with other standards in the third industrial revolution. But now it really comes down to how do we leverage AI? And I think the thing that is most obvious from our experience and personal experience as well is the volume of innovation that is all being, frankly, thrown at you in the torrent of information that you have to deal with and wrestle with and understand is probably one of the biggest challenges. So we've worked hard to try to make this understandable, try to help our C-level customers deal with this volume of innovation, and it's exponentially increasing. So it's not going to get any slower, it's only going to get faster. So how do we handle that? And I think everybody in the audience is probably dealing with either one or more of these constraints. So things that are shifting consumer patterns are driving things like regulatory compliance. If you're in food and beverage, you probably want to know where your product comes from. You may want to know that it's safe. You want to know that it's of a certain quality. If you're a producer of an alloy or an aluminum, you're going to have to provide information to the gas turbine manufacturer about the batch and the genealogy and the history of that particular product. So we're seeing consumer patterns driving regulation and traceability. Of course, we get into other regulated industries like pharmaceuticals and various other regulatory compliant industries. They're driving a lot of the new opportunities, not challenges, but opportunities with Industry 4.0. Of course, we have aging infrastructure. The good news is, if you are working with plants that have been built in the 50s or the 60s or maybe earlier, it's actually pretty easy to use things like reality capture and digitalization to model those plants and to actually connect them. Because most of the assets in those plants we would think of as dead, right? They're not really connected, they're not exhausting data, they're not really giving you any meaningful information. So you can wake them up pretty easily, and we'll talk about how you can wake up these assets that maybe were installed maybe 10 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe 70 years ago. Of course, sustainability is a really big challenge for us right now, also feeding and fueling regulatory compliance. So energy is a big issue. When you think about, for instance, the electrolysis process when you get into minerals and metals or metallurgy, that could be 5% of your energy or 5% of your total cost of goods sold. So how can we help with that, but also how can we help to get into a zero carbon footprint? And then I think we heard a lot about how do we handle the upskilling, reskilling, and it's a big problem worldwide. Not only because of the knowledge and the subject matter expertise. In fact, ABB has been around for over 125 years, and one of the strengths that we have is we have people who have been solving very, very thorny problems in many different industry segments and application areas. But how do we ensure that we preserve that competitive advantage and that capability to help our customers, and how do our customers ensure that they're able to, all of you, you're able to maintain the domain expertise and the subject matter expertise for your production processes. So this is a really big challenge that we have as well. So one of the things that we really we try to think about, and just very simply, when we think about Industry 4.0, it's really about the opportunity to sense, analyze, and act. And if you break it down, and there are lots of use cases. In fact, I think one of the earlier speakers from Deloitte said you can Google and find hundreds of use cases that map to end-to-end value chains for the different industry segments. It can be a bit overwhelming. So if you just kind of break it down, it's about these three things. In sense, of course, is, we have one example here from OKEA. So they have an oil platform 130 kilometers off the coast of Norway. And what's happening is they're collecting data through sensors. That's actually being analyzed in Silicon Valley, near San Jose. And one of the things that we're able to do is model the KPIs, and there's only a 1-second delay. So when you start thinking about real-time, or many, just a few years ago where we had multiple second delays, we're now approaching real-time. And we're going to hear about 5G. We've talked a little bit earlier today about secure edge data centers and what's happening at the edge. But real-time is absolutely possible these days. And so then what do we do about it? So the information and insights, of course, feeding a data lake, allowing us to do some interesting things with machine learning and look for patterns, allows us now to get actually to another level, which is not just analyze, but get us very close to autonomous. And so this is where we are really focusing, because we think that this is the future. And we've heard a lot, of course, in the news about autonomous vehicles and transportation. We hear about some of the autonomous material handling vehicles used in manufacturing. I think the opportunity for us is to look even beyond automated, look towards autonomous, and build the foundation for autonomous. So one of the questions that came up prior to the conference was, how does Greece think about leapfrogging over perhaps other companies or competitors or other people that have been investing heavily in the past, let's say, 5 years? And so I would say, that was a really difficult question to think about. I started to think about additive manufacturing, and would I buy a CNC, 5-axis or multi-axis CNC machining center today? Probably not. I would buy some type of a 3D metal additive printer and work with generative design and modeling so that I don't have to machine anymore. I can actually start to print parts. I mean, there are a lot of different things you can think about if you want to jump forward and over. And I think one of them that you should seriously think about is autonomy and autonomous, because that's actually moving beyond, of course, transportation. It's really something that we're seeing a lot in manufacturing. And so we did see some project lifecycle maps earlier, which were very good. But if you break it down into maybe 3 major phases, you can think of it as design, operate, or commission and operate and maintain. And on the design side, there's a lot of opportunity here related to, again, digitalization of your existing assets. If we had set up a laser scanner in this room when we kicked off the meeting this morning, probably in about an hour from now, we could have a very detailed 3D model, a point cloud of this room with, the details of the lighting fixtures, the fasteners on the walls. And so if you have aging infrastructure, you have plants that have been around for a while, it's very easy to start to create digital representations of those and then start to create digital twins. We're more or less moving into the simulation stage of looking at your OEE and optimizing your plants. Digital commissioning, we heard a bit about augmented reality. So a lot of this is happening through, of course, HoloLens. I think Microsoft has one of the most compelling offerings right now with HoloLens 2.0. And we're working a lot. We've been working with Microsoft now for several years to allow remote maintenance. This is not only going to affect, let's say, the efficiency in reducing the time to startup, but just to share, a couple of other use cases. I was in Mumbai recently meeting with a utility that sends workers out to aging substations in their power system. And they're having a big human safety issue with people walking into these closets, basically, that are not configured consistently, and they don't have the safety things that need to be in place. So by having a remote expert helping to help the maintenance person remotely, having real-time line of sight, and then doing the expert coaching remotely at a central location, they're actually saving human lives. And so you can really think of HoloLens as supporting, I mean, this entire spectrum, but really heavily in commissioning and maintenance is where we see a lot of those use cases and where we're currently using it. Even in assembly. So if you're, for instance, building a stator or a rotor or some type of a rotating piece of equipment, all of the parts need to be in balance. And if you have a scale and you have a HoloLens, we actually are using this to provide work instructions. So a worker places a part on a scale, and then basically the HoloLens tells them in which position to put it in around the center of the stator, rotor, et cetera. So some really interesting ideas. And then digital maintenance, I mentioned one is for the substation maintenance, but really this also comes into remote monitoring, and this is something that we're doing a lot of for customers. I'll share some of these stories. But really, getting things connected, being able then to remotely monitor them. I was in one of our centers where we're monitoring 5,000 robots. And of course, this is super important for predictive maintenance and for making sure that we are able to avoid downtime. So these are kind of the three primary areas that we think about. When you start looking at the why, I mean, I'd like to spend a minute to say we know there are 8 things that all of you tend to care about. If you had to distill it down to just 8 things, it's going to be quality, safety, reducing CapEx and OpEx, speed to market, cybersecurity, and what did I say? Cybersecurity, quality, safety, speed to market, as well as availability and productivity. So those are going to be the 8 things that primarily you're going to try to prioritize when you're thinking about the investments to make in whether it's upskilling your people, process, or tools, or upgrading those. And so with the Industrial 4.0 factory, I mean, we have heard a lot about the end-to-end digital factories. We've talked a bit about the enabling technologies. We think of 14, actually 15 if you add 5G. So these are things like, we saw some of them earlier, but blockchain, AI, machine learning, sensing, robots, robotics, cybersecurity actually, because there's some very interesting things happening there. And then you get into autonomous, et cetera. So the trick is, how do you map the use cases with your end-to-end value chains and take a persona-based approach? So we heard a really great approach that Deloitte is using. So you're either a plant manager, you're a control engineer, or you're collaborating, a team that's collaborating in an agile way across these roles. How do you want to help them address the quality, safety, productivity, whatever the key business drivers are, and pick 2, don't pick all 8. And then what disruptive technologies can you bring to the table to help? AR, VR, and the various others that we have. This is the way we're helping customers approach this kind of high volume of data and disruptive technology information that they're getting bombarded with, which makes it a little easier for them to get involved and solve. So if we take a look at the autonomy and the people side of this, we're doing some very interesting things around, let's say, control rooms these days, related to ergonomics. So for GDPR and privacy reasons, we cannot really, let's say, instrument operators in control rooms, but we certainly know the physiological conditions or the physical conditions of their environment. Now, if you start thinking about fleets and you start thinking about connected factories and managing fleets of production facilities, like I'm sure most of you are, isn't it interesting to know something about the alarms and events that happen from one factory to another, and then to know a little bit about the environmental conditions and the shifts that your controllers, your operators are working in, and how long it took them to actually address an alarm and event situation, or perhaps look at root cause and how it got there in the first place. So you can do some really interesting things with the data, even around just the environmental conditions, without getting into privacy issues. And we have people that are actually opting in. I mean, essentially saying, yeah, watch my Fitbit while I'm operating, look at my workload and stress level, and help, if that helps us improve our business, then that's okay. So, and of course, in the future, this is all going to be augmented with AI, and it's already happening today. It's not really in the future. And so this is what we think is really important. It's really where the human brings the best that the human can bring to the equation, and AI brings the best. I often will stop and ask everybody, if you had as much computing power as you possibly could use, and it was free, what would you do with it? Because that's kind of where we're headed. So, it's an interesting question. To this point, we've had lots of barriers related to cost and OpEx, CapEx, et cetera, but the price points are dropping significantly. And so literally, think about that. How would you use all of the compute power through infinite computing that you have at your disposal, all of the connectivity through 5G that allows you to do things real time? What would you do with that for your business? And this is where you need to have probably a change in mindset to really open up and think about the possibilities. But humans are fantastic, right, at intuition and creativity and bringing expertise based on past performance. AI is really great at learning those things, but really it's the expertise and the computational power. So we believe, bringing these together and supporting our workers, our workforce, no matter what role, what persona they have, from the factory to the boardroom, can really help in thinking about our customers' customers. So how can we help them as well? And so how do you get there? We heard a lot today, which I think is really important, and we certainly believe in, and get started. Think big, start small, but take a first step. And that's absolutely, I think, great advice. So it also
1 or 2 minutes more.
Okay, very good. I also think there's data there that we see related to the pilots that are out. And a lot of the pilots in Industry 4.0 went very broad, very big in scope, and some froze, right? They didn't really continue on. So you've got to really manage that scope. Of course, work with partners. I think we heard a lot about that today. Build your digital workforce. There are lots of great examples if you look at what's happening in India with PM Modi's government. If you look at Singapore, if you go all the way back to like the foundation, a couple of best-in-class examples. And of course, all of the things we heard about. This is about transformation and change. You've got to manage it that way. But I would say that where we hear people say, pick a corner of your factory, pick a work cell, pick a line, I would say maybe think a little bit differently about it. Think about getting things connected, then think about moving up to condition monitoring, go into predictive maintenance, and really move yourself up this continuum. We have many use cases of pilots that have been turned into projects and are successful in various industries. And what I'll do is, and they follow this continuum, and this PDF will be available on the website for the event. And maybe if we get into a question that involves one of these, I'll bring it up as well. But very pragmatically, we can show how customers are driving those KPIs and improving their performance. So thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.